This video is going to walk you through, at a high level, the 4 major steps in building a future fit scorecard. First, we need to build that overall corporate scorecard that captures the top level performance of the business against the 21 future fit business goals. From there, we can drill down and ensure that the various future fit initiatives are correctly lined up to where the gaps are in the organization's current performance. From there, the next step is to build the operational scorecard. The operational scorecard is kind of the drill down that allows us to get a better perspective within each region, team, department, individuals, how they are performing against the future fit criteria. Now, in truth, you can go straight from the corporate scorecard down into the operational scorecard and skip the alignment step if your projects are already aligned. From the operational scorecard, we then drill down to the management practices. How do we use the future fit scorecard and the future fit operational scorecard to make better decisions day to day? Now, again, if we want to skip the operational scorecard, we can go straight from the initiative alignment into management practices. And in fact, if we wanted to, we could even go straight from the corporate scorecard down to management practices. So these 4 steps work best if you take them sequentially, but in fact you can skip steps depending on your organizational needs. So I'm now going to step you through each of these in a little bit more detail. So let's take a look at the corporate scorecard. What we're trying to do there is provide you with ongoing view of future fit's performance against the 21 future fit business goals. The initiative alignment determines the gap between your current performance and what your target future fit performance is. And that allows you to select the appropriate future fit gap closing initiatives and allocate your resources for maximum impact. The operational scorecard drills down to the department, team, and individual level and ensures that not only are we aligned with the overall goals, but we as an individual or as a team can understand our purpose and feel proud of the contribution we're making towards future fit. And the management practices are all about sustaining the future fit scorecard across time, making it part of the ongoing management process, not a separate step. Now, let's step through each of these in even more detail. So, the future fit corporate scorecard. What we're trying to do is, with any organization, refine which of the 21 goals fit for that organization. So, some are just not appropriate based on the business, the geography, and so forth. Now, the remaining ones then need to be prioritized because they're not all equally important for that organization for this period. So, for example, there may be stakeholder pressure or local regional issues that need to get dealt with critically in the near term. We then, based on those, identify indicators for each of those goals. Based on available data, how can we measure our current performance with indicators as opposed to measures? Now, the problem with indicators is sometimes they're not as strong as a detailed measure. So we should assess the signal strength to make sure all readers understand the relationship between that indicator and the underlying future fit goal. From there, we can begin setting what are our current targets for the current period. So ultimately, we want to push towards future fit, but every journey is taken one step at a time. What does this quarter or this year's step look like? We then, of course, need to harvest the current data and perhaps historic data so we can see the trend lines. And then finally, we can launch that corporate scorecard. We're going to use a case study to explain how we apply the future fit goals to an organization. We're going to use a fictitious organization that's based on one of our clients, and this organization is called Frederick Industries. Frederick makes rolled tubing. So this tubing is what we see in things like heat exchangers, processes in mining, inside buildings for water for fire systems and so forth, and even structural members in buildings. So obviously there's a bunch of coil steel coming in, it gets cut, rolled, galvanized, formed, and so forth. So it's a good example of future fit. what we should be able to do is take the 21 goals within Future Fit and determine which ones are appropriate for Frederick. So in this case, we might decide that paying the right tax is paid at the right place at the right time. We don't need to worry about that one because there's only one location and they're actually a member of City Council, so they're way above board. And also, lobbying doesn't undermine the future fitness. They don't lobby as being a member of the local community for over 250 years. There's none of that going on. So we're going to weight those at 0. But we also have to weight all the other objectives. So as we go through it, we might find something like this. So for them, their most important Future Fit goal for this year is water is used in an environmentally responsible and socially equitable way. It's an issue that is becoming more and more important in their community, and they've already been outstanding, but they just want to get that last bit of being as good as possible and a model example in the organization, in the community. So once we have that weighting, we then can begin to refine which ones we're going to use and go forward with. And so the ones which are most important for them are things like water, but also emissions, greenhouse gases, byproducts, and so on. So they've identified what are the key things we want to focus on for the coming year. Now, if we take a look at one of those, for example, energy is from renewable sources, the Future Fit equation says that we should be using the measures of how much energy is consumed from renewable resources divided by total energy. Now, in this case, that's easily accessible, but they also want to add in some leading indicators, things like the number of clean energy initiatives that they're undertaking, even though they're not going to be rendering benefits to them this year or perhaps even next year, the number of alternative sources that they've determined that they can use, and so forth. So in addition to just the recommended Future Fit assessment metric, they're using the assessment metric but other leading indicators that will help them see how they're performing. In another area, for example, employee health is safeguarded, the indicators that they've chosen to use are those which are readily available to them but don't match the recommended Future Fit equation. So things like their mentorship program, the way that they've begun to set up common areas both inside the building and outside the building. The benefits being in the USA are not provided by government, what they're doing to provide them, and so forth. So these are examples of indicators that they've used in their corporate scorecard, and this is kind of what it looks like. Again, they've identified it within each of the core areas of Future Fit, and then identified within all the 21 which ones they're measuring against and how they're performing. This current scorecard is looking at their performance compared to target. The next step is to understand about our initiative alignment. So ultimately what we're trying to do is identify the core processes and activities, so processes and projects inside the organization, as well as those of our suppliers and our customers. And from there, we want to assess the impact and performance of each activity area against each Future Fit goal. Based on that, we'll identify some performance gaps between how we, our suppliers, and customers are conforming to those Future Fit goals. Then, we can take a look at the various initiatives we're proposing to try to close those gaps. And from there, we can realign our Future Fit gap closing initiatives to get maximum impact. So we're now going to step into the gory detail of how we make sure that our activities are lined up with Future Fit. So what we've done is we've listed for Frederick Industries 9 core processes, things which are clusters of activities that they do day to day. And these are things like, sales and marketing, product development, but also the entire supplier value stream or the entire customer value stream. And in theory, these activities are done to either support Future Fit or are in fact the activities that cause us to be not Future Fit. So we should be able to assess our performance against the future fit goals of each of these activities. What does that look like? It should look a bit like this. We call this an ontology. We've listed down the left side of the sheet the future fit goals which are appropriate for us, and across the top these clusters of activity. And what we should be able to do is assess how much each of these activities is impacting these goals. Let's take a look at that. So if we drill into that top corner, we could ask ourselves a question: how much is sales and marketing impacting our ability to ensure energy is from renewable sources? Now, on a 1 to 5 scale, perhaps the impact is not that significant. I'd give it a 3. Now, what we do is we multiply the impact, 3, times a weighting, 6, and set an appropriate color for this cell. Now, how about product development? What is the impact of product development on energies from renewable sources? Well, in this case, it's probably significantly higher. We'll say it's a 5, and 5 times 6, obviously, 30, higher number. This cell is slightly darker. What's the impact of sales and marketing on water is used in an environmentally responsible way? Yeah, it's got no impact. So we don't even have to score that. And then over here, what is the impact of product development on water used? Again, maybe it's got a high impact, but now the 5 times 10 is 50. So this cell is now black. So if we take a look at the overall system, what we begin seeing is that across all the activities, there's some activities that clearly we need to find some indicators for because they have a higher impact. Then the gray ones are sort of the second tier of indicators we look for, and the light gray is kind of the third tier. So we can begin to figure out which of our processes impact our ability to do future fit. Now, this is interesting, but in order to assess how we're performing, we need to add the performance on as well. So let's add that on. So what does that look like? Well, again, we're just going to zoom in this top corner here so we can take a closer look. These are the weightings, the impact weightings that we had before. Now what we've done is scaled it from A to F on how we're performing. So in this example, we're meeting expectations, so it's an A, and therefore it's green. Now what's interesting is in this case it's a C and red, and the same score as C and yellow. Why is that? Well, because at a weighting of 10, this is more important. I need a higher performance level in order to be acceptable. Now, some people get cut up on this, and the example I often use is, think of a kid at school. If you want your kid to become an accountant, math is more important than art. So if the kid comes home with a C in math and also a C in art, because your strategy puts math to be more important, that C in math is a bigger issue for you. So now as we take a look at our future fitness, it's based on what our priority is as we try to move towards future fitness, and this C is a bigger issue for us. So now if we take a look at that total ontology, we can begin to see some patterns. And these are patterns which are invisible right now to the organization. But this is a snapshot, a 30,000 foot view of this organization's future fitness. So let's take a look at, for example, our suppliers. We can see that overall we need to work with our supply chain because it's performing quite poorly. Now, we would never have seen that without doing this ontology format. Or better yet, if I look horizontally, I'll see that our customer information is unlikely to be successful since all the processes are either red or yellow. So the idea is this reveals some of the operational issues inside of our organization that will affect how we are being future fit. In fact, because these are just numbers, I can add up across this sheet to give you something that looks like this. So just to help you out for a second, the height of the bar represents the amount of process support we need to achieve our future fit goal. The gold part represents the gap between how we're currently performing and what our strategy calls for. So this is how well we're moving towards our future fit goal, the blue part, and the gold is the part that we're missing. Now, this footprint is typical when we look across organizations. In some cases, there's no gap, some cases teeny, and other cases significant gaps. And in this case, not only is it a significant gap, but the gap is in fact larger than how we're currently performing. So our goal ultimately is to deal with these goal parts. What is the gap and how we're going to work on closing them? But again, we managed to make this invisible thing visible so we can now take action on it. So what we could then do is take a look at the other type of actions we take, the initiatives. So in this example, there's 4 initiatives they've launched this year to help deal with their future fit gap. And so we can do the same thing. We can take a look at each of these initiatives, take a look at how many resources they take to achieve, and what their impact is. So now if we do the same thing and score these, what we can see is, and we'll chart them as like red dots. So the red dot represents the amount of portfolio focus we have to improve our gap in each of these 21 goals, or in fact 19 goals in this case. Now the red dots, it's a 2-axis chart, so the red dots are charted against this axis over here. Now remember, we're launching those projects to close these gaps. So what do you think the chances are those red dots and these the yellow bars are going to be perfectly aligned? In other words, that we're allocating proportionally exactly the right resources against each of these gaps. You're right. In our average client, it's about a 66% gap. The gap between what is needed and where we're investing our money is misaligned. And we see this. In this case, we're overinvesting. In other cases, we're underinvesting. And so this allows the leadership team to begin to align their investment in Future Fit against what their priorities are for this period. And that way we avoid misallocating resources on things that won't give us the feedback and are more effective on where we are allocating our resources. So this allows us to begin making way better informed choices about how we move towards Future Fit. If we move on to the third step, which is building the Future Fit operational scorecard, if we skipped step 2, we still need to identify those core processes. We still need to assess the impact, not necessarily the performance. Then we can go on and begin identifying where we need to provide performance indicators. So where do our core activities have the highest impact on our Future Fit goals? And from there, we can identify indicators to use at each place, determine the signal strength for those indicators, set the targets, and then finally harvest the data and turn on the operational scorecard. So if we did step 2, we already have this ontology. Remember the first step where we took a look at the 21 Future Fit goals and the core activities and rated the impact. If we did skip step 2, then the first part of step 3 is obviously to build out this ontology. Now, what we've done is identify the specific node where we need to find additional information. So as we look across this, it looks a bit like this. What we should be able to do is take that overall goal, energies, renewable resources, and the framework we have within Future Fit is we kind of split that up to what are the management practices versus what are the outcomes. And in terms of management practices, we then split that up into policies versus processes. And again, we're going to find indicators at this level based on that ontology. So for example, maybe I'm just going to take a look at the number of clean energy policies and give an overall performance score that would show up in my operational scorecard. For processes, maybe I take a look at mandated processes that exist, again a score, and then I can aggregate those up to give me the overall management practices. Likewise on the outcomes, we can look at the proportional outcomes and absolute elimination and measure those things, get the scores, and put that on the scorecard. So the idea is the ontology allows us to figure out what that drill down is in the areas that are most important. We don't have to measure everything. We just have to measure the things which are critical to driving overall future fitness. Now in this case, maybe elimination is a key issue, and therefore we're going to drill down as far as we need to go to get reasonable scorecard results for the organization. Now, I've shown it to you as an impact diagram. there are multiple ways we can show that in the organization. Most people think of these in terms of just a scorecard where we see, for example, for employee health, how we're performing, what are the milestones and how we're doing against those, and even what are the projects that we've launched to help close the gap. And so now I've consolidated the information about the activities on a single page and put it into context. Now, again, there are many ways to serve up this data, and there's available software that we've been using that allows us to put in these formulas and these metrics to capture and make this part of management's ongoing activities. Finally, the fourth step, which is embedding this in our management practices. Now, it seems straightforward, but there are a couple of things we need to do. One is to make Future Fit part of the daily, weekly, monthly, and quarterly reporting cycles and their discussions about improving the organization. You know, Future Fit not only impacts our performance to improve it, but also reduces risk and improves stakeholder returns. So it needs to be part of the ongoing conversation. We also need to help people understand how to analyze and provide informed commentary on our Future Fit activities. Then we need to begin changing how we run our meetings to make sure these activities are part of the conversation and we have effective follow-up activities related to our commitments over the next period. So again, the Future Fit scorecard has 4 major steps. The corporate scorecard, which leads into the initiative alignment, which leads into the operational scorecard, and then that in turn leads into management practices. And these can be done in any sequence based on the organizational needs. I hope this has been informative to you. If you want to learn more, there's a second video that will go through the detailed methodology for each of these steps.